Shout out to What Lurks Beneath YouTube channel. We're gonna get right back into it.
Standing half in shadow was something close to 10 snaps. And then Larry sucked in a breath and brushed, thumbed it on, and swept the beam across. So Buster grabbed his flash to joke about it heavy. And so Larry whispered it was probably a deer. Their friend tried to joke about Bigfoot, but neither sounded convinced. So Buster grabbed his flashlight, thumbed it on, and swept the beam across the tree line. Trunks, brush, nothing. He started to lower the light, and then Larry sucked in a breath and pointed. Over there were two amber circles hovering in the dark, far apart and far too high off the ground. Buster steadied the light, and that's when the outline snapped into view. Standing half in shadow was something close to 10 feet tall, covered in dark fur. It was upright, but it hunched forward, and its arms hung long enough that the clawed hands reached its knees. The head looked like an enormous wolf, ears pinned back, jaws partway open, and the eyes, they seemed almost lit from within, locked on the three men. For several seconds, nobody moved. Buster felt rooted to the dirt, flashlight shaking in his grip, and he just kept thinking to himself that there's no way this is real. And then the creature's lips curled, exposing fangs the length of his fingers, and it rumbled a growl so deep he felt it inside his chest. Folks,
would you guys try to fight it off with your friends? Would you guys chase it off? What would you guys do in this situation?
Things finally won. Buster told the others they needed the boat now, and they backed toward the water, trying not to turn their backs, and this thing then stepped into the firelight, and the full horror of it hit them. Shoulders nearly 4 feet wide, claws like knives, and a smell of wet dog mixed with rotting meat that made Larry gag. The thing suddenly roared, half howl, half roar, and charged. The men quickly flung the boat off the bank, jumped aboard, and nearly tipped it as they scrambled. Larry yanked the starter cord once, twice, and the motor sputtered. Buster risked a glance back and saw this thing crouched at the edge of the water. Its eyes were blazing, its muscles bunching like it might leap, and on the third pull, the engine caught with a roar. Larry slammed the throttle open, and the boat shot forward, sending all three sprawling to the bottom. When Buster looked again, the creature was wading in knee-deep water, pacing, but
326 miles ago, you were a proud man.
Yeah, I'm getting to that shallow water.
But it stopped there. It threw its head back and let out a howl so loud that it echoed clear across the lake. Then just stared at the boat as they sped away. And those eyes followed them until distance and darkness just swallowed the shoreline entirely. Well, they didn't let up until they hit the opposite launch. Larry leapt out, tied a sloppy knot, and the three practically dove into the pickup. Gravel sprayed as they tore down the dirt road toward the highway. Only when they'd driven several miles did anyone speak. Their friend kept asking what that thing was, but Larry explained that it was nothing natural. Buster had no answer at all, and they spent the rest of the night huddled in Larry's living room, blinds shut, doors locked, waiting for sunrise. None of them slept. Every creak of the house set their nerves on edge. Now, the following afternoon, Buster and Larry forced themselves back to the lake. Broad daylight, rifles in hand, just to collect their gear. The place looked normal, but the silence still felt wrong. At the campsite, they found chairs overturned, the cooler ripped open, and in the mud, a set of prints 3 times wider than Buster's hand. The tracks walked like a person, left, right, left, but each one had claws digging into the earth, and 7 feet up a pine tree were fresh gouges cut through the bark. That was all either brother needed. They grabbed what was salvageable and left for good. Their friend never set foot near that lake again. Now, in the weeks that followed, none of them really slept. Larry refused every invite to camp, and their friend told the story once to his father, got a look of disbelief, and never mentioned it again. Buster started digging online and discovered reports of something locals called a dogman, which was a towering, wolf-headed thing that walks on two legs. The descriptions matched right down to the amber eyes, and every time Buster read another account, he just felt a cold confirmation that legends sometimes turn out to be real. And even now, years later, Buster still won't fish that lake. What they met that night wasn't an animal acting on instinct. It was something intelligent, something evil, and it let them go only because deep water lay between hunter and prey. He knows not everyone gets that lucky. On the night of July 5th, 2012, a 48-year-old maintenance supervisor named Tom Ruiz was working the late shift at a remote oil lease outside Cotulla, Texas. It was a sweltering summer evening, mid-90s, even after sundown. So Tom kept a dented metal thermos of sweet tea next to the little box fan buzzing on his desk. A little after 11 p.m., he stepped out of the trailer office, grabbed a flashlight, and started his routine walk to the new security cameras that had been mounted on the pump jacks. Now, some context for the cameras. For nearly 2 months, the company had been losing crude oil. Somebody was sneaking onto the property at night, hooking a hose to the stock tanks and vanishing before sunrise. Well, management figured cameras were cheaper than hiring extra guards, so 3 motion-activated units were bolted to the steel catwalks. One facing the access road, one covering the tanks, and one pointed toward a dirt clearing nobody ever used. Tom's job, every night, was to pop the memory cards out of each camera and swap in fresh ones. And so, flashlight in his left hand and a set of Allen wrenches in his right, he walked the line. He unscrewed the first housing, replaced the card, tightened the plate, and moved on. Nothing unusual. Same with the second camera. But when he reached the one aimed at the empty patch of dirt, he noticed something odd. The display on the back, normally dark, was pulsing faintly. He chalked it up to the heat, pulled the card and slipped in a new one, and headed back. Inside the trailer, the air smelled like old coffee and machine grease. Tom sat down at a dusty Dell computer, slid the card into the reader, and opened the first image. He expected to see a grainy picture of a pickup truck or maybe some guys in hoodies siphoning oil, but instead, he froze. On the screen was the clearing. In the middle of that clearing sat a smooth, oval object resting just inches above the dirt. It was maybe the size of a small bus, and the camera's infrared flash made the thing glow white hot against the dark background. Now, around the perimeter of the craft were 4 shadowy bumps that looked like landing pads.
I thought it was going to be
No
another
doors,
werewolf
no
story.
windows, no markings, just this silent machine hovering in darkness. Tom just leaned back, rubbed his eyes, and thought to himself that this has to be a glitch. So, he clicks to the next frame. Same object, same position. Next frame. Now it's gone. Nothing but empty dirt again. And the whole sequence, based on the timestamps, lasted maybe 3 seconds. At this point, Tom is not a UFO guy. I mean, he hunts, he fishes,
If you really want to be a CEO, want to be an entrepreneur, you should take the first step. Create the LLC. It doesn't really cost that much.
he fixes broken pumps. That's it. But what he's looking at makes no sense. And the more he stares, the more he feels that prickly pressure in his ears
Why
that
is she
shows up right
reviewing?
before panic kicks in. So he does what a lot of people do when something weird
Security
lands in their
footage.
lap. He emails it to a buddy, and within an hour, the photo has ping-ponged around the night crew. And by sunrise, every field hand with a company email has seen it. Nobody has an explanation, but everyone agrees on one thing. Those definitely are not oil thieves. Well, a week later, the image reaches Tom's 21-year-old daughter, Marissa, who is living 3 hours away in San Antonio for college. She opens the attachment on her phone, zooms in, zooms out, and then calls her dad. He tells her that the company hasn't said a word about it and that the camera itself checked out fine. Marissa is a person who binge watches paranormal documentaries between classes, decides the photo needs to be in front of people who study this kind of stuff. So she fills out an online form for MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network, and uploads the file. Then, nothing. Weeks roll by. Fall semester starts. No follow-up. No phone call, no investigator poking around the lease. It's like the report fell into a black hole. But the internet, as usual, does its own thing. And sometime around Thanksgiving, the picture pops up on a fringe forum. And from there, it kind of just ricochets across UFO blogs. On January 21st, 2013, a researcher named Scott Waring publishes a write-up claiming the craft may have shot straight out of the Gulf of Mexico, which sits about 110 miles south of Cotulla. He argues that underwater bases are perfect hideouts because, as he puts it, 3/4 of the planet is water. The post explodes, comment sections light up. Some readers insist the light pattern under the object proves anti-gravity technology. Others just swear it's a doctored image pointing to pixel edges. A small group latches onto the original theft problem and wonders aloud if whoever or whatever took that oil might not have been human at all. Meanwhile, Tom and his crew keep pumping crude. The company replaces a couple of locks, but the missing oil issue stops on its own. Nobody is ever caught. The camera that shot the photo is still in service, still aimed at the same clearing, and it has never captured anything unusual again. As for MUFON, investigators later admit they can't find a single file on the Cotulla case. It's as if the report was never logged, so the picture sits online, suspended between believers and skeptics, and the only people who know for sure the image is real are a handful of tired oil workers who just wanted to catch a thief and ended up photographing something the rest of us still can't explain. On a foggy spring morning in 1857, a 27-year-old cattle drover named Jesse Lincoln Driscoll eased his horse onto a muddy wagon path just outside of Austin, Texas. He had left Missouri a few weeks earlier with nothing but a bedroll, a Colt revolver, and a head full of ideas about turning longhorn cattle into long piles of cash. So, as he looked over the rolling hills, he thought to himself that this place felt wide open and unfinished. Exactly the kind of place where a man like him could get rich. Fast forward 4 years to May of 1861, and the Civil War is breaking out. Food for the Confederate Army is running low, and Jesse, now 31, suddenly finds every steer on his ranch worth its weight in gold. Confederate officers ride up, tell him they need thousands of pounds of beef, and Jesse tells them he can make that happen. For the next 4 years, that is all he does. He drives cattle, sells cattle, and watches enormous piles of money land in his lap. By the time the war ends, he's thinking that he might actually be one of the richest men in the entire state. In 1884, Jesse decides cattle aren't exciting anymore. He wants something more grand, something permanent that would outlive him. So, he walks down to the corner of 6th Street and Brazos in downtown Austin, slaps a wad of bills onto a surveyor's map, and buys the entire block. Then, he hires architects to design the largest, most luxurious hotel Texas has ever seen. Jesse explains to everyone that when it opens, it will make Austin the social center of the Southwest. Well, construction takes 2 years. Marble floors go in, gas-lit chandeliers drop from carved ceilings, and hand-painted frescoes line every hallway. On December 20th, 1886, the Driscoll Hotel finally opens. Papers call it a Romanesque revival masterpiece. Jesse, standing in the lobby in a brand new wool suit, is thinking that this place is going to print money forever. But then, everything falls apart. 6 months after opening, Jesse starts losing cash faster than he made it. He drinks too much, gambles too hard, and a according to one porter, spends entire weekends entertaining women whose names nobody ever seems to catch. Late one night in the summer of 1887, he sits down at a poker table, bets the deed to his hotel on a single hand,
And loses.
The next morning, a clerk changes the name on the property ledger, and Jesse walks out of the building that still carries his name, now as a guest, not an owner. He will never come back. The hotel keeps running, though, and within a year, the first tragedy strikes. Sometime in 1888, a housekeeper hears light, quick footsteps on the grand staircase, and she turns just in time to see a little boy, no older than 6, chasing a small ball that is bouncing down the steps. The boy stumbles, turns head over heels all the way to the marble floor, and never gets up again. Guests that week complain about a cold draft running up the stairs, but management can't find the leak anywhere. Well, a few years later, in 1890, the 4-year-old daughter of U.S. Senator Temple Lee Houston checks in with her family. No, if you've recently been injured in a car accident,
That's scary. It's like The Shining. Is it The Shining?
Nobody ever says exactly what happens, only that there is a horrible accident somewhere inside the hotel, and the child does not survive. The body is carried out quietly through a service door before sunrise.
Got something like that.
And for weeks after, staff avoid that corridor because, as one of the bellboy explains, it feels like someone tiny is clutching the hem of your coat and won't let go. By the early 1900s, the Driscoll has a reputation for luxury and for something none of the brochures mention. In 1908, a young bride checks into her room 525. Her fiancé has just called the wedding off, and for 2 days, she keeps the curtains drawn, ordering meals she barely touches. On the third morning, she leaves the hotel, walks 2 blocks to an upscale boutique, and spends what would be $40,000 today on new clothing and perfume. That night, she returns, lines every purchase up to the foot of the bed, pulls a small handgun from her purse, presses a pillow over the barrel, and, well, you know what happens. Hotel management has the room cleaned and reopens it quietly, but employees talk that the air inside never smells like furniture polish, only like burned gunpowder and fresh roses. And in 1934, the hotel story takes a lighter turn, at least for a moment. On the evening of January 22nd, this lanky 25-year-old congressional aide named Lyndon Baines Johnson meets a short, sharp-witted young woman named Claudia Ladybird Taylor for dinner in the Driscoll's dining room. They hit it off immediately. Staff later say that Johnson looks like he might float right out of his chair, and for the rest of their lives, whenever the Johnsons are in Austin, they book the same suite on the top floor. Now, 30 years later, November 3rd, 1968, LBJ, now President of the United States, returns to that same suite to watch the election returns. When the networks finally call the race in his favor, he strides down to the hotel ballroom, thanks his supporters, and breaks into what witnesses describe as an unhinged victory dance that goes on far longer than anybody expects. And so from that night forward, the Driscoll is basically presidential property. All the while, the tragedies never really leave. Guests complain about hearing a child's giggle echoing up the stairwell at 3 in the morning, while others wake to the steady thumping of a ball bouncing off hallway walls, and a cigar smell that drifts through the 4th floor corridor, even though the hotel has been non-smoking for years. One man wakes at exactly 3 in the morning, sees a well-dressed stranger standing at the window of his room, and watches, frozen, as the figure calmly smokes a cigar and stares down the street. When the guest finally musters the courage to flip on the bedside lamp, the stranger is gone. But the curtains are still swaying, and the room still reeks of tobacco. Around this time, management decides the ornate 5th floor landing needs something tasteful. They commission an artist named Richard King to recreate an 1880s painting called The Love Letter. A little girl in a white dress, holding a bouquet of flowers in one hand and a letter in the other. looks harmless, so they hang it outside Suite 525, but almost immediately, weird things start happening. Guests walking by say they feel someone tugging the back of their coat. Others swear the girl's eyes track them down the hall, and one housekeeper pushes her cart past the frame and feels a cold hand clamp around her wrist and drops every towel she's carrying. When she looks up, the hallway is empty, but she could still feel 5 tiny fingers digging into her skin. Now, by the 1990s, paranormal investigators are calling this place the most haunted building in Texas. Even ghost tours added to their nightly route. And then, in 2023, Yelp releases a data-driven list of America's most haunted spots. Out of every abandoned asylum, battlefield, and creepy lighthouse in the country, this hotel ranks number 1 for the entire state of Texas, and its downstairs bar comes in at number 2. Today, if you walk through the brass-framed revolving door, the lobby looks almost exactly the way it did in 1886. Marble under your feet, stained glass above your head, and if you believe the stories, a cattle baron, a heartbroken bride, 2 playful children, and a former president still roaming the halls. If you stay here, just remember something. At this hotel, somebody or something has already decided which room you're staying in. On a Saturday afternoon in the middle of the summer of 1982, 13-year-old Dan, who lived just outside of Midland, Texas, finished mowing his parents' lawn, wolfed down a peanut butter sandwich, and then wheeled his little red Honda dirt bike out to the driveway. But what if you could cut the time you spend drafting in half?
Pretty good stories.
Copilot, the professional-grade generative AI from Thomson Reuters. A few minutes later, 3 of his buddies, same age, same obsession with anything that had an engine, powdered up, and the 4 of them took off for the open desert scrub that rings the city. Now at this point, riding in that wasteland was basically their whole world. They did it every weekend, and Dan knew every dry wash and cactus stand out there. So when the boys shot through the last barbed wire gate and the tires finally hit the loose sand, he wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. He was just thinking about who